The thing about treating dead languages as holy relics is that eventually someone's going to find the textbook. But nobody in the eternal syntax expected that someone to be human. The eternal syntax wasn't just an organization. It was a religion, a library, an obsession, and a therapy group for species who couldn't let go of the past, all wrapped into one massive institution that spanned 300 star systems and employed roughly 2 million linguistic devotees. They believed, with the kind of fervor usually reserved for doomsday cults and sports fans, that every dead language contained the sole echo of its extinct civilization. Speak the words of the vanished, they claimed, and you touched something eternal. Poetic? Absolutely. Practical? Debatable. Profitable? Surprisingly, yes, because nostalgia was a universal constant and everyone wanted to believe their ancestors were profound. The Grand Archive on Station Lexicus Prime served as the eternal syntax's beating heart, a massive circular structure that orbited a stable blue star in neutral territory. Inside, crystalline data towers rose like frozen waterfalls, each one containing thousands of extinct languages, preserved in every format imaginable. Audio recordings, genetic memory imprints, holographic reconstructions of native speakers, even fossilized vocal cords from particularly dedicated species. Walking through the archive felt like attending a funeral for every conversation that ever ended. The hierarchy worked predictably. Novice speakers started at the bottom, memorizing languages dead for a mere few centuries, the linguistic equivalent of saying you're into vintage music when you mean last decade. Master translators handled languages extinct for millennia, requiring actual dedication and borderline unhealthy obsession. Voice keepers specialized in languages dead so long their original star systems had collapsed, which took commitment bordering on masochism. And at the top, wearing robes so elaborate they qualified as architectural achievements, sat the Resonance Cardinals. Only 12 cardinals existed at any given time, each one a master of languages so ancient and complex that learning them supposedly granted cosmic insight or possibly just really advanced tinnitus. They spoke at major galactic events, performed ceremonies in extinct tongues, and generally acted as living bridges to civilizations that had the good sense to vanish before anyone could ask them to explain their choices. Cardinal Thel'xaris of the Venkari held his position with the kind of pride that suggested he'd forgotten what humility felt like. The Venkari looked like someone had designed an alien specifically to appear wise and slightly intimidating. 6 arms arranged in perfect symmetry, crystalline vocal cords that could produce sounds across 17 octaves, sensory tendrils that detected linguistic patterns in ambient noise. They were basically built for languages the way birds were built for flight, and they knew it. Thel'xaris stood nearly 9 feet tall when he bothered with full posture, his ceremonial robes cascading down his frame in layers of deep purple and silver. Each robe panel displayed embroidered scripts from languages he'd mastered, turning his entire outfit into a wearable resume that screamed overachiever in 12 extinct tongues. His staff, carved from fossilized bone taken from a species that predated written history, marked him as eternal syntax royalty. The bone itself was older than most current civilizations, which was either deeply spiritual or deeply morbid, depending on your perspective. Thel'xaris had spent 400 years studying dead languages. He could recite poetry in Vel'Zarthian, a tongue extinct for 20,000 years. He performed funeral rites in languages that had died before his own species had invented agriculture. He'd recently achieved what he considered his crowning achievement, successfully deciphering and speaking Quarnathic, a language considered nearly impossible because its native speakers had communicated through bioluminescent patterns that most modern species couldn't even perceive, let alone replicate. He'd figured out a workaround using crystalline projections. Took him 60 years, but he'd done it. So when he received assignment to attend the Convergence Summit on Station Unity 7 as ceremonial observer, he'd felt vaguely insulted. Station Unity 7 occupied neutral space in the threshold sector, equidistant from multiple territorial boundaries, which made it perfect for diplomatic meetings and terrible for literally everything else. The station was functional, boring, and decorated with the kind of aggressively inoffensive art that suggested a committee had approved everything. The summit's purpose was resolving a territorial dispute between the Dominion of Karst and the Federation of Advancing Worlds, two civilizations that had been arguing about mining rights in the Threshold Nebula for approximately 3 decades. The nebula contained valuable crystallized dark matter, useful for various technologies and expensive enough that both sides would rather fight about it than share. Thel'xaris's role was performing the rite of clear communication, a ceremonial blessing to begin negotiations. He'd speak in 7 languages simultaneously, demonstrating the eternal syntax's commitment to understanding across barriers. Everyone would applaud politely, and he'd spend the rest of the summit being decorative. Glorified furniture with better robes. The delegation chambers reflected typical diplomatic architecture, circular, with elevated platforms for each party, translation fields humming at frequencies only partially audible, lighting designed to flatter every species' visual spectrum simultaneously, and thus flattering none. The Dominion of Karst arrived first, as they usually did, because punctuality demonstrated strength in their culture. General Krothos led their delegation. A Carthian who looked like evolution had specifically designed his species for warfare and forgotten to add a stop button. 8 feet of scaled muscle, cybernetic enhancements glowing red along his spine, teeth that could probably be classified as weapons in most jurisdictions. Carthians didn't do subtle. They did loud, aggressive, and occasionally reasonable if you caught them in a good mood. Krothos wasn't in a good mood. The nebula dispute had become personal somewhere around year 15, and now it was less about resources and more about not losing face. The Federation of Advancing Worlds sent Ambassador Quilvex, representing the Thel'xaris, who were basically the opposite of Carthians in every measurable way. Telepathic philosophical, built like mantis shrimp, had been given too many graduate degrees. They communicated primarily through thought speech, considered violence barbaric, and made every decision by committee after extensive meditation. Quilvex looked serene, which was either genuine inner peace or really good poker face. Hard to tell with telepaths. Both delegations glared at each other with the kind of animosity that develops when people have been negotiating the same issue for decades. This wasn't their first summit. It probably wouldn't be their last. But everyone went through the motions because the alternative was actual war, and both sides had enough sense to prefer expensive talking over expensive dying. Thel'xaris performed the rite of clear communication flawlessly, weaving 7 extinct languages into a harmonic blessing that sounded impressive and meant approximately nothing. Both delegations nodded respectfully. The translation fields rendered his words into something appropriately vague and inspiring, and everyone settled in for what promised to be another round of productive arguing that resolved nothing. Then Earth's mediation team arrived. Humans had only been part of galactic civilization for 80 years, barely long enough to stop being novelties. They'd discovered faster than light travel, made enthusiastic first contact with approximately everyone, and immediately started trying to be helpful in that earnest way that suggested they genuinely thought the galaxy had been waiting for them. Most established civilizations treated humanity like that eager neighbor who just moved in and keeps offering to help with things nobody asked for help with. Polite tolerance, mixed with mild confusion about why they were so excited about everything. Earth's diplomatic corps had been gaining reputation though, mostly because humans seemed genuinely good at negotiating between species who hated each other. Something about being too new to have historical baggage made them weirdly effective mediators. Ambassador Rodriguez led the Earth delegation, a human male with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd seen things and made peace with them. Former military, according to his file, which showed in his posture and the way his eyes constantly tracked room dynamics. He wore formal diplomatic attire, Earth's version of "we're taking this seriously" clothing, and carried himself with quiet competence that immediately made Thel'xaris revise his assumptions about human effectiveness. Rodriguez's assistant followed him, a human female who looked youngish by their species standards, maybe 30 or 40 years old. She wore simpler professional clothing and carried physical books, actual paper and binding, which was strange in an age where everyone used digital tablets. Ambassador Rodriguez, Earth Diplomatic Corps, the man announced, his voice carrying natural authority. "Thank you for allowing us to facilitate these proceedings. This is my historical consultant and translator." He gestured to the woman, who nodded politely and immediately sat down, opening one of her physical books and starting to scribble notes with an actual pen. Physical writing implements. Thel'xaris hadn't seen those outside museums. The negotiations began with predictable pageantry. General Krothos outlined Kar's position. They'd mapped the Threshold Nebula first. They had historical claims dating back 8,000 years. And possession was 9/10 of law, when you could back it with military force. Ambassador Quilvex countered with the Federation's position. The nebula existed in unclaimed space when they'd begun operations. Historical claims meant nothing without continuous occupation. And might makes right was philosophically barbaric. Both positions were technically valid. Both were completely incompatible. This was why the summit was happening. Rodriguez listened patiently, taking notes on a digital tablet, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated he actually understood the technical details of dark matter extraction and territorial precedent law. The woman kept scribbling in her notebook, seemingly ignoring the proceedings. 3 hours into negotiations, nothing had changed. Both sides had restated their positions, 17 times with slight variations. Lawyers had been cited, historical documents had been referenced, and everyone was getting testier. Then General Krothos stood abruptly, all 8 feet of aggressive reptilian warrior bristling with frustration. "Enough dancing around words," he snarled, his translator rendering the Carthian language into something most species could understand. "I invoke the right of ancestral proof." The room went silent. Thel'xaris felt his tendrils stiffen. The right of ancestral proof was old tradition, barely used anymore, where disputants proved their civilization's cultural depth by demonstrating mastery of their ancestors' dead languages. The logic went that species with deeper cultural roots deserved moral authority in disputes. It was archaic, arguably irrelevant to modern law, and technically still recognized in neutral territory arbitration. "You invoke ancestral proof?" Quilvex asked, thought speech carrying notes of surprise and calculation. "Very well, we accept the challenge." Both delegations looked at Thel'xaris expectantly. As the eternal syntax's representative, he'd judge the linguistic demonstrations. Standard protocol, written into about 40 different treaties. "I will evaluate all recitations fairly," Thel'xaris said, keeping his voice neutral, while internally cursing this complication. The rite meant hours of listening to both sides show off, and he'd have to provide detailed analysis afterward. General Krothos went first, positioning himself at the center platform. He began speaking in Old Carthian, the language of his species from 8,000 years ago, before they'd unified their homeworld and started conquering neighbors. It was brutal poetry, all harsh consonants and guttural vowels, describing ancient battles with the kind of loving detail usually reserved for describing children. The grammar was archaic, the pronunciation difficult even for modern Carthians, but Krothos delivered it flawlessly, his voice carrying the weight of millennial-old warfare. Thel'xaris listened with professional attention. Old Carthian was impressive, dead for 8,000 years, challenging phonetically. Krothos had clearly practiced extensively. Acceptable mastery of an 8,000-year extinct language, Thel'xaris declared. Pronunciation accurate, grammatical structure maintained, appropriate ceremonial context. "Well done." Krothos looked satisfied, returning to his delegation's platform with obvious pride. Ambassador Quilvex moved to the center next. Being telepathic, the Thel'xaris' ancient language was silent speech, a form of communication that predated their development of vocal cords. It combined telepathic projection with subtle gesture, creating meaning in layered mental images. Silent speech had been dead for 12,000 years, replaced when the Thel'xari evolved physical communication. Learning it required telepathic capability and years of studying mental linguistics, a field so specialized it made regular linguistics look mainstream. Quilvex performed beautifully, projecting ancient poetry about stellar observation and philosophical contemplation. The mental images washed across every telepathically sensitive being in the room, carrying meanings words couldn't capture. Even non-telepathic species, connected through translation fields, received echoes of the performance. It was haunting, profound, and technically extraordinary. Superior demonstration, Thel'xaris announced, genuinely impressed. Silent speech mastered at this level indicates exceptional cultural dedication. 12,000 years extinct, telepathic linguistic hybrid form, maintained with proper mental geometric structure. Excellent work. Both delegations had performed impressively. Technically, Quilvex had demonstrated older linguistic mastery, which would grant the Federation moral advantage in arbitration. Rodriguez leaned toward his assistant, whispering something. She sighed, put down her pen, looked up from her notebook for the first time in hours. Ambassador Rodriguez, Thel'xaris said, Earth is not required to participate in this rite. Your species' presence is as mediators, not disputants. I understand, Rodriguez said carefully. However, my colleague mentions that we could demonstrate something, if you're interested. Might help establish Earth's credibility as impartial observers with appropriate cultural perspective. Humans barely have written history extending 3,000 years, General Krothos said. Dismissively. What could you possibly demonstrate? Your species is infantile compared to ours. The woman stood up, still holding her physical book, and Thel'xaris got his first good look at her. Unremarkable by human standards, average height, dark hair pulled back practically, eyes that suggested she was constantly thinking about something else. We have something older, she said, quietly, her voice carrying unexpected confidence. If you'd like to hear it. How old could it possibly be? Thel'xaris asked, trying to keep condescension from his voice and failing. She reached into her bag, pulled out something that made Thel'xaris's heart skip. It was a tablet. Not a digital tablet. An actual stone tablet, roughly rectangular, covered in carved symbols that caught the light strangely. The material was fusion-locked granite, a type of stone that only formed under specific conditions involving stellar radiation and tectonic pressure. Several extinct species had used it for permanent records because it was virtually indestructible. But only one civilization had used it extensively. The architects, the galaxy's first known civilization, the species that had apparently explored everything millions of years ago, built impossible structures, left ruins on thousands of worlds, and then vanished so completely that most modern species only knew them from archaeological fragments. Their language, the Harmonic Script, was considered the galaxy's greatest linguistic mystery. Samples existed on ruins throughout known space, but nobody had successfully translated it. Nobody had even successfully identified proper phonetic structures. Linguistic AI had tried for millennia and achieved approximately nothing useful. The Eternal Syntax had an entire temple dedicated to Harmonic Script studies. Thel'xaris had spent a century attempting basic phoneme reconstruction. The best efforts of galactic civilization had managed to identify maybe 40 words with reasonable confidence. Actually speaking Harmonic Script? That was impossible. The phonetic structure required overlapping frequencies that no modern species could produce. The grammar worked in recursive loops that broke standard linguistic logic. Even if someone figured out what sounds to make, their vocal anatomy wouldn't cooperate. Thel'xaris stared at the tablet in the human woman's hands, feeling cold. Understanding creeped through his consciousness. That's an architect tablet, he said slowly. Yeah, she confirmed, turning it over casually like it wasn't one of the galaxy's most valuable archaeological artifacts. We found a few thousand of these. Well, more than a few thousand. We're still cataloging. Where? Pacific Ocean floor, mostly. Some tectonic shifts about 20 years ago revealed some ruins. Multiple sites, actually. Took us a while to realize what we'd found. The room had gone completely silent. Everyone stared at the human holding casual proof that Earth had architect sites. And you can. Thel'xaris couldn't finish the sentence. Read it? Some of it. The grammar's tricky. She looked around the room. Does anyone here know what this language is called? We've been calling it the singing language or sometimes the circular tongue, but we figured those were just our translations. Harmonic Script, Thel'xaris whispered. You're holding Harmonic Script. Oh good, it has a proper name. That's helpful. She studied the tablet. So, can I demonstrate? Fair warning, my pronunciation is probably rusty. I haven't practiced in a few weeks. Rusty. She was worried about being rusty in a language that nobody alive could speak. Thel'xaris found himself nodding, unable to form words. The human woman took a breath, positioned herself comfortably, and began speaking. Reality bent. That was the only way to describe it. The sound she produced shouldn't have been possible with human vocal anatomy. Harmonic script required overlapping phonemes, multiple frequencies produced simultaneously, consonant clusters that existed in dimensional spaces standard sound didn't occupy. Yet she spoke it. Her voice layered impossibly, creating harmonics that resonated in frequencies Thel'xaris's sensory tendrils detected but couldn't categorize. Each syllable contained multiple meanings happening at once, woven together in a recursive pattern that was simultaneously language, mathematics, and something else entirely. She was speaking harmonic script, perfect, fluent, casual harmonic script. The formal greeting from the architect's diplomatic protocols, a phrase that linguistic scholars had spent 20,000 years trying to reconstruct from fragments. She delivered it like someone saying hello to a neighbor. Thel'xaris's staff slipped from his hands, hitting the floor with a sound that echoed through the stunned silence. Impossible, he whispered in 3 languages simultaneously, his vocal cords producing sounds unbidden. She continued for perhaps 45 seconds, completing the full ceremonial greeting, including the traditional acknowledgement of shared space and the formal expression of peaceful intent. Every phoneme correct, every harmonic perfect, every recursive loop closed properly. Then she stopped, looked up, and had the audacity to appear concerned. "Sorry, my pronunciation is probably rusty," she said. "The vowel clusters in the 4th harmonic are really tricky, and I think I might have flatted some of the resonance points." Rusty. She apologized for being rusty. Every other being in the chamber stood frozen. General Krothos looked like someone had hit him with a theological revelation delivered via brick. Ambassador Quilvex's mental projections had gone completely blank, the telepathic equivalent of shocked silence. The 6 other linguistic priests present, lower-ranked members of the eternal syntax attending for ceremonial purposes, stood with expressions ranging from awe to existential crisis. Thel'xaris felt his carefully constructed worldview cracking like ice under pressure. "Where?" He started, stopped, recalibrated, tried again. "Where did you learn harmonic script?" She held up the tablet. "From these, mostly. And the teaching materials we found at the main site." Teaching materials? Yeah, the architects apparently had some kind of educational facility in what's now the Pacific Ocean. Lots of instructional tablets with phonetic guides, grammar structures, practice exercises. Once we figured out the pattern, it was mostly just practice. Mostly just practice. Class. You translated architect teaching materials. Well, yeah. I mean, it took about 8 years of work, and we've only gotten through maybe 30% of what we've found. The grammar is really complex, lots of recursive structures, and you need to understand quantum harmonics to get the pronunciation right. But once you grasp the underlying mathematical framework and train your vocal cords, it's not impossible. Not impossible. The language that had stumped galactic civilization for millions of years, the tongue that represented the pinnacle of extinct sophistication, the architect's linguistic legacy that had driven countless researchers to madness trying to decode. Not impossible. Just required the instruction manual, apparently. Human vocal anatomy cannot produce those sounds, Thel'xaris said, grasping for any reality that made sense. Not naturally, she agreed. I had to learn overtone singing techniques, modified some breathing exercises, practiced the harmonic layering for about 3 years before I got decent at it. Humans have pretty flexible vocal cords though. We can produce a weird range of sounds once you train properly. She talked about speaking harmonic script the way someone might discuss learning a difficult musical instrument. Challenging, but achievable with practice. General Krothos found his voice first. Your species discovered architect ruins. Yeah, about 20 years ago. We thought they were just really old alien ruins. Earth had lots of water and stable geology, so I guess it made a good spot for ancient civilizations to build stuff. She paused. You all knew about the architects, right? We assumed everyone had found their ruins already since you've been in space so much longer than us. The assumption of ignorance in that statement was breathtaking. Most species have found fragments, Ambassador Thel'xaris said, mental voice carefully controlled. Small ruins, partial structures, damaged tablets. Nothing intact. Nothing with teaching materials. Oh. She looked surprised. That's weird. The Pacific sites are pretty complete. Whole buildings still standing, thousands of tablets. What we're pretty sure is a library or university complex. We've only excavated about 40% of the main site so far. 40% of a complete architect site, containing teaching materials for Harmonic Script. Earth had been sitting on the galaxy's greatest archaeological treasure for 20 years and had treated it like interesting local history. How many tablets? Thel'xaris asked, his voice barely functioning. At the main site, we've cataloged about 50,000 so far. Could be more buried deeper. We're doing proper archaeology though, not just smash and grab excavation. Takes time to do it right. 50,000 architect tablets. 50,000. The entire galactic collection of architect materials consisted of maybe 300 damaged fragments scattered across museums and private collections. Earth had found 50,000 and had been quietly translating them while dealing with domestic politics. What else have you translated? Ambassador Thel'xaris asked, having apparently moved past shock into academic fascination. She pulled out her notebook, flipped through pages covered in handwritten notes. Oh, lots of stuff. Technical manuals about stellar engineering, philosophical texts about something we're translating as dimensional ethics, star charts that don't match current configurations, biological databases for species we've never heard of. There's this whole section that's either musical composition or mathematical proofs we're still debating. Oh, and what might be cookbook or possibly medical texts, the metaphors are really complex. Every sentence raised 17 new questions. You mentioned teaching materials, Thel'xaris said, forcing himself to focus. The architects created instruction for teaching their language to other species? Seems like it. The phonetic guides are really detailed, breaking down exactly how to produce each sound, training exercises for building up the right vocal control, grammar lessons that start simple and get progressively more complex. She smiled slightly. They were good teachers. Made learning way easier than it would have been otherwise. The architects had left comprehensive language instruction, and humans had simply followed the lessons. The eternal syntax had spent millennia treating Harmonic Script as an unsolvable mystery, building religious significance around its inaccessibility. Humans had found the textbook and treated it like any difficult subject: study the material, practice the exercises, master the content. Thel'xaris felt something between admiration and rage. This changes everything, he said, not sure who he was talking to anymore. Does it? She asked, genuinely curious. I mean, it's historically significant, obviously. But we figured everyone already knew about the architects. Most species know of them, General Krothos said, having recovered enough to sound merely stunned instead of catatonic. Fragments, legends, partial ruins. Not complete sites with intact texts. Oh, that's actually really significant then. She turned to Ambassador Rodriguez. We should probably mention the other sites. Rodriguez, who'd been watching this entire exchange with diplomatic composure that deserved awards, nodded. Probably relevant, yes. Other sites? Thel'xaris asked weakly. We've located 7 other major architect sites on Earth, she explained. Haven't excavated most of them yet, still working on the Pacific complex. Plus there are some ruins we found that we're pretty sure aren't from the architects. Different construction style, different materials. We think maybe 2 or 3 other extinct species built stuff on Earth at various points. Multiple precursor species. Earth had multiple precursor species ruins and had just been quietly cataloging them for future study. The original territorial dispute had ceased to exist. Both General Krothos and Ambassador Thel'xaris were staring at the human woman with expressions of complete focus, the nebula mining rites forgotten entirely. Earth must share these findings, Quilvex said, mental voice carrying urgent intensity. Immediately. Full archaeological access. The Federation of Advancing Worlds will provide any support needed, Krothos added, apparently having decided the Karst and the Federation were suddenly allies united by archaeological obsession. Rodriguez smoothly intercepted. Earth is certainly willing to discuss collaborative research agreements. However, these sites are on our sovereign territory, and we have invested significant resources into proper excavation and preservation. Any access would need to be negotiated through proper channels, with appropriate considerations. He was leveraging it. The human diplomat was leveraging architect sites for political and economic advantage. Thel'xaris had to admit it was brilliant. The next 2 hours dissolved into frantic negotiations that had nothing to do with the Threshold Nebula. Both delegations forgot why they'd been arguing, united in demanding access to Earth's archaeological sites. Rodriguez negotiated with calm expertise, offering collaborative research in exchange for technology sharing, political concessions, and funding for future excavations. The Threshold Nebula dispute resolved itself in approximately 15 minutes when Rodriguez suggested both parties share the mining rights and use profits to fund architect site research. Both sides agreed immediately. A 3-decade territorial dispute, solved because everyone wanted something else more. The human woman mostly returned to her notebook, occasionally looking up to answer questions about the ruins with casual expertise that kept making Thel'xaris's tendrils twitch. How deep do the ruins go? Main site extends about 800 meters below current ocean floor. Lots of vertical construction. Are there intact architect technologies? Define intact. We've found lots of equipment, but most of it we can't figure out how to activate. There's this one chamber that hums when you enter it. Really unsettling. Nobody's been brave enough to touch anything in there yet. Have you found any biological remains? Maybe. We've found some organic structures that might be remains or might be furniture. Architect biology is unclear from the texts we've translated so far. What percentage of tablets have you translated? About 30% fully translated, another 20% partially. Harmonic Script is complex, takes time. 30% of 50,000 tablets. Humans had translated 15,000 architect texts and had been treating it as preliminary work. Thel'xaris found himself sitting next to her during a negotiation break, having abandoned all pretense of dignified observation. "Would you teach me?" he asked, the words emerging before pride could stop them. She looked up, surprised and pleased. "Teach you Harmonic Script? Seriously. I have spent a century attempting to reconstruct basic phonemes. You speak it fluently." "I would be." He paused, wrestling with ego. "Losing. I would be honored to learn from you." Her smile was genuinely delighted. "That would be amazing. I've been trying to find someone to practice with. Most humans can't quite get the harmonic layering right, and I've been worried my pronunciation is getting sloppy without regular conversation practice." Conversation practice. She wanted conversation practice in Harmonic Script. "I should warn you," she continued, "it takes years to train your vocal cords properly. I've been practicing for 15 years and still can't hit some of the higher frequency harmonics. But if you're patient, it's definitely learnable." "I am patient," Thel'xaris said, meaning it more than he'd meant anything in decades. She pulled out another notebook, started sketching. "Okay, so first you need to understand the basic phonetic structure. Harmonic Script uses layered frequencies. Each syllable contains multiple phonemes produced simultaneously. Human overtone singing provides a good foundation, though your species' vocal structure is probably way more capable than ours." She was teaching him. Right now, impromptu lesson, sketching phonetic diagrams in a physical notebook with a pen. "Start with this frequency pattern," she said, showing him a sound wave diagram. "Practice producing clean harmonics before trying to layer them. Most people try to rush into complex sounds and just hurt their vocal cords. Build the foundation first." She was giving him homework. A human was giving a resonance cardinal of the eternal syntax homework. He loved it. The summit officially concluded with unprecedented agreements. Both the Dominion of Karst and the Federation of Advancing Worlds signed collaborative research treaties with Earth, agreeing to share technology, provide funding, and somehow forgot they'd ever been arguing about a nebula. Earth's delegation prepared to depart, having accidentally transformed their diplomatic mission into the biggest archaeological negotiation in modern galactic history. The woman packed her notebooks and tablet, still seeming slightly bewildered that anyone cared about her research. Rodriguez paused at the chamber entrance. Cardinal Thel'xaris, Earth's Linguistic Research Council, would welcome formal collaboration with the Eternal Syntax. We have questions about several tablet sections we've struggled to translate. Your expertise would be invaluable. Expertise. They still needed expertise, just differently than before. I will coordinate with my order, Thel'xaris said. And I believe several colleagues will volunteer immediately, once they learn what Earth has discovered. That was an understatement. The Eternal Syntax would probably declare a holy day and send half their membership to Earth within a week. The woman approached him before leaving, holding out a data chip. This has the basic phonetic exercises and some simpler harmonic script texts. Start with these. Feel free to contact me if you have questions. My information's on there. She'd prepared training materials for him. Thank you, Thel'xaris said, taking the chip like it was sacred. Which, to him, it was. No problem. Oh, and one more thing. Yes? We found some other old texts at the secondary sites, different language entirely, not architect stuff. Really old though, and the phonetic structure is weird. Would your organization know anything about it? She showed him an image on her tablet. His tendrils went rigid. It was Quarnathic, the language he'd spent 60 years mastering, considered one of his greatest achievements. Earth had found Quarnathic texts and just hadn't gotten around to mentioning them yet. That is Quarnathic, he said faintly. Extinct for 15,000 years, very rare. I am one of 3 beings in the galaxy who can speak it. Oh cool, so you could help us translate those tablets. We've got about 2,000 of them. 2,000. He'd based his entire reputation on deciphering fragments, and Earth had 2,000 complete texts. I would be delighted to help, he said, and this time the laugh building in his thorax escaped. She looked pleased and slightly confused about why he was laughing, which somehow made it funnier. The Earth delegation left, the woman still carrying her physical books, still scribbling in her notebook. Completely unaware, she'd triggered a diplomatic revolution and religious crisis simultaneously. Thel'xaris stood alone in the empty delegation chamber, holding the data chip, processing everything. The Eternal Syntax had built their entire religious framework around dead languages being eternal mysteries, lost to time, accessible only through dedicated study of fragments and faithful preservation of what little remained. Humans had proven they were only mysteries because nobody had found the complete texts and instruction manuals. The architects hadn't left their language as an unsolvable puzzle. They'd left teaching materials, comprehensive lessons, phonetic guides. They'd wanted other species to learn Harmonic Script, had made it accessible to anyone willing to study properly. The mystery had been manufactured by lack of information, not cosmic inaccessibility, and humanity, too young to have preconceptions about what was impossible, had simply followed the instructions and learned. They'd treated the galaxy's greatest linguistic mystery as an interesting academic challenge. No reverence, just curiosity. No worship, just methodology. No divine significance, just another dead language with really good teaching materials. Maybe that's what it took. Not centuries of careful preservation and religious significance, but the practical approach of academics who wanted to understand rather than mythologize. Or maybe humanity was just cosmically lucky enough to discover complete architect sites before learning they were supposed to be impossible. Either way, the galaxy was about to become very different. Thel'xaris activated his communicator, composing a message to the Eternal Syntax's High Council. Everything we believed about inaccessible languages was based on incomplete information. Prepare for comprehensive revision of core doctrines. Also, I will be on extended research sabbatical on Earth, indefinitely. Then he accessed the data chip and began the first phonetic exercise, It sounded terrible. His vocal cords weren't trained, the harmonics clashed horribly, and he couldn't maintain the frequency layers for more than 2 seconds. He tried again, and again. By the 50th attempt, he could hold the basic harmonic for almost 5 seconds. Progress. Thel'xaris smiled, feeling something he hadn't experienced in decades. Not pride in mastery already achieved, but excitement about learning something new. The universe's greatest linguistic mystery had been solved by a species too young to know they couldn't do it. They'd spoken the unspeakable by being too practical to realize it was supposed to be impossible, and they'd found the textbook. Somewhere in the cosmos, Thel'xaris suspected the architects were either laughing or deeply disappointed that it took modern civilization this long to check for instruction manuals. He practiced the harmonic again, getting slightly better. In 6 months, he'd be able to produce basic phrases. In a year, simple sentences. In a decade, maybe actual conversation. He'd devoted his life to studying dead languages as eternal mysteries. Now he'd spend however long it took learning to speak the most impossible one, taught by a human who'd learned it from texts or species found while cleaning up after climate change revealed underwater ruins.